welcome to this video. We are going to learn the detailed structure of the skin. So in clinics, any patient is coming with the dermatological or skin disorders means they will be a little bit distressed or they will be anxious, and they may show some anxiety even at the family or even at the occupational area, because sometimes the skin complaints can be a chronic one. So regarding the introduction to skin, we should know that integumentary system consists of skin and its appendages like the hair and the nail. So remember, the skin consists around the 7% of our body weight. Okay, so that much important is the skin. So there is a latest information that earlier the skin was considered as the largest organ, and recently the interstitial space is considered as the largest organ. So that position of largest organ that is replaced by the interstitial space. Earlier it was the skin. Surface area wise the largest organ was skin, but now it is interstitial space. So now let us analyze what are the important functions of the skin. Remember, skin is very important. So first we have to know how exactly skin is protecting us. So skin is acting as a barrier between the external environment and our internal environment of body. So the entry of certain substances or microorganisms or any toxins, something from external environment to the skin is prevented, to the internal environment is prevented by the skin. And again, skin is protecting us from the harmful effects of UV rays, ultraviolet radiations. So skin is acting as a barrier between the internal body environment and our external environment. Second thing is maintenance of body fluid. That is true because the body fluid cannot be evaporated from the body internal environment, because skin is existing as a barrier in order to prevent the evaporation of this body fluid. Thermoregulation, by sweating the fluid can be perspired out, and this is a thermoregulatory mechanism. Okay, sweating. So extremely hot climate means we will sweat, and through that sweat the excess body heat will be transmitted to the external environment through the sweat. Again, skin is having a very good role in activation of vitamin D. Okay, 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol. That is the active form of vitamin D. So that's why it is advised to expose to sunlight little bit every day in order to activate this vitamin D. Excretory function of the skin. Remember, through the sweat, unwanted salts, everything can be excreted out. Next is sensory function. Our skin is showing sensory receptors. These sensory receptors are biological transducers. They can convert the stimuli to the nerve impulse form, and that can be carried through the sensory nerves. And skin is with a rich number of such sensory receptors like touch receptor, tactile receptors, okay, pain receptors, thermoreceptors, like that. Different receptors are there in the skin. Remember, there are two types of skins in our body, thick skin and thin skin. As the name suggests you, thick skin will be thick and the thin skin will be comparatively thin. Thickness will be different. Usually in the palm and sole we can see the thick skin. Even structures or the layers are also different, that we will explain shortly. But remember, the rest of the body parts are showing the thin skin. Okay, thickness will be less, and additionally there are some other difference that we will explain shortly. So thick skin is seen in the palm and the sole, and the thin skin is seen in the rest of the body parts. So now let us enter to the topic, microscopic structure of the skin. Remember, skin can be divided into two layers. The outer layer is called as epidermis. So this is the outer layer, that is called as epidermis. And again the under layer or the inner layer is called as dermis. Okay, dermis and epidermis. Epidermis outer layer, dermis the inner layer. Again we have subcutaneous area, that is usually called as hypodermis or subcutaneous area. Remember, usually the epidermis part will be less vascular. Vascularity will be very less. But the dermis portion, the deeper portion, will be richly vascular. Rich vascularity, rich blood vessels are seen in the dermis. Now let us learn in detail about the epidermis, that is the outer layer. Remember, the epidermis is usually made up of 5 layers. And all these 5 layers you can appreciate. We will start from the basal layer or the innermost layer, which is called as stratum basale. Actually, that is the border layer that is located between the dermis and the rest of the layers of epidermis. Okay, so the basal layer, stratum basale, so that is forming the boundary between the epidermis and the dermis. So next, just superficial to the stratum basale, we have stratum spinosum. Again, outer to that, we have stratum granulosum, then stratum lucidum and stratum corneum. So these are the different layers of the skin that is in the epidermis. Epidermis can be divided into 5 layers. And remember, these epidermal cells, all the layers of the epidermis, these are showing the major types of the cells called as keratinocytes. Almost 90% of the cells seen in the epidermal region is keratinocytes. Remaining hardly 5% cells are non-keratinocytes that we will explain shortly. What are the non-keratinocytes? First, we are learning in detail about epidermal layer, that is the basal layer, stratum basale, that is the deepest layer of epidermis. And this layer is forming the boundary with dermis. Okay. Remember, this stratum basale is a single layer of cells. Most of the time that will be cuboidal or even sometimes low columnar. So this is stratum basale and this is called as germinal layer because so this layer can divide and that will become the next layer. That will become the next layer. That will become the next layer. So like that it is happening. Meanwhile, if one layer is pushing up, pushing up, pushing up, new layer of stratum basale will be formed. Okay, so that will push it superficially. Again, that will push superficially. Meanwhile, new and new layers, stratum basale will be formed here. Okay, that's why this is called as germinal layer or mitotic layer. Okay, so this is highly mitotic. And remember, again in the stratum basale we can see certain other types of cells. These are not keratinocytes. Stratum basale cells are usually keratinocytes, so that can secrete the keratin, that will be filled with keratin. And remember, there are certain other cells like the melanocytes and tactile receptor cells, like that different other cells also can be seen. Okay, but majority of the cells are the keratinocytes. Next is stratum spinosum. Just superficial to or above the stratum basale, you have multiple layers, 4 to 5 layers of stratum spinosum. Remember, these stratum spinosum will be polygonal in appearance, so polygonal cells can be seen. And this stratum spinosum got that name because while processing the tissue, what is happening means shrinkage can happen. Okay, because of its tonofilaments and all, the shrinking of these cells are happening. That's why that shrunken part will be showing spine-like parts. Spine-like appearance will be there at the area of these tissues. So that's why these are called as stratum spinosum. Next is stratum granulosum. As the name suggests to you, inside the cytoplasm you can appreciate granules. So these are all keratinocytes. All these stratum spinosum, granulosum, all these cells are keratinocytes. So remember, the stratum granulosum cells are filled with the tiny granules, keratohyalin granules. That's why these are called as granulosum. So when you are drawing the cells, you can draw a diamond shaped cells, 2-3 layers of these diamond shaped cells. So here it is very clear, and that will be mostly darkly stained because of rich number of granules in the cytoplasm. That is called as stratum granulosum. And these keratohyalin granules are dealing with the secretion of the keratin. Next is stratum lucidum. Remember, outer to stratum granulosum, here we can see a thin layer of stratum lucidum. What is happening is the cytoplasmic organelle, including nucleus, everything will be destroyed. And the cytoplasm will be filled with the keratin. The cytoplasm will be filled with the keratin. So this is called as stratum lucidum. Okay. And there is an important point to be remembered. Stratum lucidum will be absent in thin skin. Okay, so all the 5 layers can be demonstrated only in the thick skin. But in thin skin, stratum lucidum will be absent. So that we have to think of. Next is stratum corneum. Stratum corneum is the superficial moss layer, and remember here stratum corneum is made up of the cells which are dead and dehydrated. And remember the entire cytoplasm will be filled again with the keratin. And remember this stratum corneum will be frequently shedding off, and the new layer will be coming from deeper aspect to become stratum corneum. And this stratum corneum will be much more thicker in the thick skin, like in the sole and the palm, and that will be very thin in the thin skin in the rest of the body parts. That is about stratum corneum. Next we will discuss what are the different types of cells seen in the various layers of epidermis. So majority of the cells, around 90%, 90 to 95% of the cells seen in the epidermis is keratinocytes. And these keratinocytes are distributed in all the 5 layers of epidermis. And hardly 5% cells are non-keratinocytes. That includes melanocytes, Langerhans cells, and Merkel cells. And remember, these melanocytes, Langerhans cells, and Merkel cells, these are all structurally and even functionally different. So let us discuss about all these cells. The first variety is keratinocytes. That is, these are the cells which are producing the keratin. The protein substance keratin is produced by the keratinocytes. Almost 90% cells are keratinocytes. And remember, these keratinocytes which are distributed throughout, like stratum basale, spinosum, granulosum, lucidum, the nature of the keratinocytes can be different. Initially, the stratum basale, that is the germinal cells, so that those cells are shifting to the stratum spinosum. Again, that will be shifting to stratum granulosum, further lucidum, corneum, like that. This is happening. And there is a skin cell cycle. So what is this skin cycles? So this is around 40 to 50 days. That means from the stratum basale, a new layer of cells that is produced, and gradually that will be shifted to stratum spinosum. Again that will come slowly to the granulosum, lucidum, corneum. So the time taken to reach from the basal layer to the stratum corneum for shedding out, so this is around 40 to 50 days. But remember, in certain dermatological condition, for an example, psoriasis and all, this cell cycle will be much more reduced. So there will be scaling will be there. Okay, in the scaly skin conditions, this is happening. This will be shortened. So this already I mentioned what is happening in certain clinical conditions like psoriasis. So the stem cell number in stratum basale will be increased. More stem cells are there. So that will produce more cells and its division will be quite rapid, and that's why increased mitotic activity and decrease in cell cycle time. That will be less than that of mentioned. So next is melanocytes. Melanocytes are non-keratinocytes. Remember, these melanocytes are very important because they are able to liberate the pigment called melanin. This melanin is providing sufficient skin color, and also this melanin is required for protection of the skin from the ultraviolet radiations. And remember, these melanocytes are with numerous processes. So this is an enlarged view of the melanocytes. Initially, these melanocytes are located at the stratum basale, but its processes are gradually migrating to the stratum spinosum and to the gap between the stratum spinosum. And remember, these melanocytes are producing the melanin. And remember, now the pigmentation of the skin, ordinary or the normal skin texture or colors are given or contributed because of several cells and several factors. The first and foremost thing is melanin. This melanin is required in order to provide blackish coloration or darkish coloration to the skin. And also the carotene that will provide little bit yellowish structure of the skin, that is provided by the carotene. And the hemoglobin in the underlying dermis, vessels of the dermis, that will provide the pinkish discoloration. So combination of everything is providing the normal skin texture. And remember, there is an interesting fact that all human beings have relatively same number of melanocytes. Okay, different people from different continents and countries, they have relatively same number of melanocytes. But remember, all the human beings are not with the same skin color. That is different. Okay, still dark skinned and pale skinned people are there because of that is because of the relative activity of the melanocytes. If melanocytes and melanin pigments are more, such person's skin will be little more darkish. But if it is very less, such people are with a pale skin. And remember, the skin color by the melanin, the imparting of the skin color by the melanin, that's a complicated chemical process is happening. Especially there is an enzyme required, tyrosinase. Okay, this enzyme activity is required in order to have the melanogenesis, that is the production of melanocytes. And this is a picture to show you how exactly the melanocytes are existing in the basal layer, stratum basale, and how exactly its processes are coming to the gap between the spinosum, that is stratum spinosum. So let us have some clinical application, especially number one, vitiligo. So remember, so there will be absence or deficiency of the melanocytes, and that's why the skin color will be altered. So there you can see white patchy appearance of the skin will be there. So that is called as vitiligo. So next is Langerhans cells. So we are explaining the non-keratinocytes. First we explained about the melanocytes. We are entering to the next variety of cells, that is called as Langerhans cells. Remember, these are not dealing with the keratin or melanin, but these are non-pigment granular dendrocytes. They have processes, and these are immunological in action. They have a very good role in phagocytic functions. So they are protective in function, and these are distributed in the among the this one spinosum, stratum spinosum. So next is Merkel cells. So these are nothing but the sensory receptors of the cells, but these are also seen in the basal layer region, but these are connected to the sensory nerve endings. So these are usually located at the stratum basale, and these sensory nerve endings are carrying the sensations received by these Merkel cells. And remember, the number of Merkel cells are different at different body parts, especially in the fingertips, lips, and also the oral mucous membrane. These are the areas where more number of Merkel cells are seen, and these are the areas which are much more sensitive when compared to rest of the body parts. So after learning detail about the epidermis, we are learning the dermis. So next is dermis. Dermis is the under area or the deeper region of the skin. So again, dermis itself can be divided into two layers, papillary layer and the reticular layer. And remember, this dermis is richly vascular, and you can see the connective tissue components like collagen fibers, elastic fibers, everything can be seen. Already we talked about epidermis is less vascular, and the dermis region is richly vascular. Remember, there are projections from the dermis towards the epidermis. These tiny projections from the dermis towards the epidermis, these are called as dermal papillae. At this area of dermis, we can see the collagen fibers, especially the type 3 and type 1 collagen fibers. Additionally, we have elastic fibers also. So the rest of the structures which are seen in the dermis, you have abundant blood vessels, and also you have the hair follicles and erector pylorus muscles, sweat gland, sebaceous gland. So these are the structures which are located in the dermis. And remember, these dermal papillae are holding the epidermis and dermis intact like an interlocked brick. So these are holding the epidermis and dermis intact. So what is happening during aging? So the skin texture of the aged people will be different. So there you can see wrinkles in the skin of the aged people. This is because of the breakage and even contraction of the collagen and elastic fibers of the dermis region. So in the younger people and in the older people skin, in the dermis, the texture of these collagen fibers may not be similar. So that's why you can appreciate the breakage of these fibers, especially the elastic fibers, and shrinking of these collagen fibers that will cause appearance of the wrinkles in the epidermal region, that is in the skin. And also the hair and hair color also will be altered. The hair can become gray because of deficiency or absence of these melanin pigments in the hair shaft. Next, hair follicle. Remember, this thin skin only will show presence of the hair follicles and hair root. Remember this hair, part of the hair which is outside the epidermis, so that you can call as the shaft. So that is outer to the epidermis region. So the rest of the parts of the hair will be buried in the epidermis and also in the dermis. So that portion forms the root region of the hair. And here this hair that is covered with a matrix, and there will be a sheath which will cover the hair root. And here you can see, in relation with this hair root, you have a muscle called as arrector pylorus muscle. So this is a smooth muscle that is supplied by the autonomous nervous system. And remember, if this smooth muscle is contracting, that will make these hairs stiffened. And in between this arrector pylorus smooth muscle and the hair root, you have sebaceous glands. These sebaceous glands are producing sebum, the oily moisturizing secretion, and these sebaceous glands are not having its own independent ducts, but its secretion will come to the hair root, and through this hair pore that will come to the surface of the epidermis, and that will make an oily or moistured appearance to the epidermis. So this is sebaceous gland. And this once the arrector pylorus muscle is contracting, the sebum from the gland will be squeezed through this hair pore. So two functions are there for the hair arrector pylorus muscle. Number one, stiffening the hair. Number two, squeezing of the sebum from the sebaceous gland through this hair pores. And additionally, in the dermis you can see the coiled tubular glands. These are called as sweat glands. But remember, these sweat glands are having its own duct, separate ducts. These ducts are passing independently, and that will freely open to the surface of the epidermis. So in the skin surface, these openings are tiny pinhole sized openings. That is the duct of sweat glands. Remember, these duct of sweat glands are lined by stratified cuboidal epithelium. Two layers of cuboidal cells can be seen as lining epithelium of duct of sweat gland. So this is the picture to show you what actually the arrector pylorus muscle is. So stiffening and erection of the hairs, tiny hairs. And remember, these muscles are very prominent and numerous in lower animals, especially in cats. So have you ever seen the fight between the cats and dogs? That time the tail of the cat will be, the hairs are stiffened. That is because of the activity of this arrector pylorus muscle. So another clinical application is the folliculitis. Remember, sometimes this hair follicle will be plugged because of the inflammatory exudates, and that will be blocked. So that can cause further inflammation of these hair follicles. That is called as folliculitis. So this is happening commonly in acne or the pimples. And again, sometimes you can see large sebaceous cyst also can be there because of blockage of this sebum and its passage. So sometimes sebaceous cyst can be there. So there will be excessive accumulation of sebum, and that will form a cyst. That is called a sebaceous cyst. This is more common in the scalp hair, because scalp hair will show more number of sebaceous glands, and sebaceous cyst is quite common in the scalp region. And this is the box to compare the difference between the thin skin and the thick skin. As I told you, the nature or the texture of the skin can be different. So main difference can be seen even in the epidermis, and in the dermis also difference can be there. So the main difference to be noted down is absence of hair follicles in the thick skin and presence of hair follicles in the thin skin. And similarly, sebaceous gland is present in the thin skin but not present in the thick skin. So hair follicle and sebaceous gland is not present in the thick skin, that we have to note down.